The sound of sirens echoed across Rikers Island as guards rushed through the dim hallways of the crumbling jail. Smoke rose from one of the cell blocks, alarms blared, and inmates screamed from behind iron bars. A riot had broken out, one unlike any the prison had ever seen. The lights flickered on and off, and the smell of burning rubber filled the air. Officer Ramirez shouted for backup as prisoners took control of an entire wing. "They've locked us out! They've locked us out!" someone yelled. Outside, helicopters circled the island, shining bright beams into the chaos. That was the night everything changed. The night that finally forced the government to shut Rikers Island down. But how did it get to this point? How did one of America's most famous jails, built to hold the worst criminals, turn into a place of such danger that even the guards refused to work? It all started months before the fire. Rikers had always been known for its harsh conditions: overcrowded cells, broken pipes, and endless fights between inmates. But lately, things had become worse. Officer Ramirez had worked there for 15 years, and even he said he'd never seen it so bad. The jail was falling apart. The food was rotten, rats ran across the floors, and the staff was too few to handle the chaos. Every day, prisoners complained of beatings, and guards complained of fear. The city promised to fix things, but nothing ever changed. Then came the strange disappearances. It began when an inmate named Travis Lee went missing during a morning roll call. No one saw him escape, no one heard him scream. He was just gone. The cameras didn't work in his cell block, and the warden claimed it was a recording error. But the inmates whispered something else, that Travis had been taken by guards who were hiding something. The rumors spread fast. Within weeks, 2 more prisoners vanished without a trace. Some said they were moved secretly to another facility. Others said something darker, that Rikers was hiding crimes inside its own walls. Officer Ramirez started digging for the truth. He noticed that every inmate who disappeared had filed a complaint against the same officer, Lieutenant Harris, a man with a clean record and a cold stare. Ramirez knew if he spoke up he'd be risking his job, maybe even his life. But he couldn't ignore what was happening. Late one night, he followed Harris through the tunnels under the old building. What he found there made his heart pound: an old medical room that wasn't on any of the maps, with handcuffs on the walls and a generator still running. Suddenly, a loud crash came from behind him. Ramirez turned, his flashlight shaking. Someone was standing in the dark, watching him. "Looking for something, officer?" a voice said quietly. Ramirez froze. It was Harris. And that was the moment everything started to fall apart at Rikers Island. Ramirez's heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the hum of the generator. Lieutenant Harris stepped forward, his face half lit by the trembling flashlight beam. "You shouldn't be down here," Harris said, his voice calm but sharp as glass. Ramirez tried to speak, but no words came out. His throat was dry, his palms slick with sweat. "You've been snooping around," Harris continued, walking closer. "Asking about things that don't concern you." Ramirez swallowed hard. "What happened to those inmates, Harris? Where did you take them?" For a moment, Harris didn't answer. He just smiled, a slow, cold grin that made the officer's stomach twist. "Let's just say they went where they belonged." Before Ramirez could react, the lights flickered again. Then, total darkness. A loud thud echoed through the tunnel. Ramirez stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. He could hear footsteps, then the sound of a metal door slamming shut. When he found the light again, Harris was gone. The room was empty, except for a single folder sitting on the metal table. Inside were photos. Prisoners, bruised, restrained, and terrified. At the bottom was a list of names, each one crossed out. Travis Lee's name was the last on the page. Ramirez knew he couldn't keep this secret any longer. He took the folder, hid it under his jacket, and slipped out through the tunnel before anyone could stop him. By morning, rumors were spreading again, but this time among the guards. 2 officers hadn't shown up for their shift. Their lockers were empty, their radios left behind. The warden told everyone not to panic, but his hands trembled as he spoke. Something was happening inside Rikers. Something big. That night, Ramirez met with a journalist named Julia Carter. a young reporter from the New York Sentinel who had been investigating corruption at the jail. They met in a small diner just off the Eason River. Ramirez told her everything about the missing inmates, the secret room, and the folder. Julia promised to publish the story, but before she could, someone broke into her apartment. Her computer was gone, her notes destroyed, and she received an anonymous call telling her to stop asking questions. She didn't stop. Days later, she went live on TV, exposing Rikers Island's darkest secret, a hidden network of guards who were torturing inmates and covering up deaths. The city erupted in outrage. Protesters filled the streets demanding that Rikers be shut down for good. But inside the jail, things were spiraling out of control. Inmates refused to return to their cells. Fires were set in the kitchens. Guards began to quit one after another, afraid for their safety. The warden called for backup, but no one came. And then, on a stormy night, power went out across the island. The gates failed. Hundreds of inmates broke free from their cells. Ramirez stood on the catwalk, staring at the chaos below. He grabbed his radio and shouted, "We've lost control of Rikers! Repeat, we've lost control!" Suddenly, through the smoke and shouting, he saw someone in the crowd holding a torch. It was Harris, smiling again, this time surrounded by freed inmates. "Let's finish what we started," Harris shouted. And as the flames began to rise, Ramirez realized this was no longer just a riot. This was the end of Rikers Island. The sky over Rikers Island burned orange as the flames spread from one cell block to another. Sirens wailed from every direction, and the air was thick with smoke and fear. Helicopters hovered above, but even they couldn't see clearly through the rising black clouds. The island had become a war zone. Officer Ramirez crouched behind a steel door, coughing from the smoke. His radio crackled with panicked voices, guards begging for help, inmates screaming for a way out. But no one was coming. The bridges to Rikers had been closed, trapping everyone on the island. Through the shattered windows, Ramirez saw Lieutenant Harris standing near the courtyard, holding a key ring in one hand and the same cruel smile on his face. The freed inmates surrounded him, following his orders like soldiers. They weren't escaping. They were destroying everything. Harris had planned this. Ramirez knew he had to stop him. He ran down the hallway, past burning walls and fallen debris, until he reached the control room. The power was still down, but the emergency generator flickered to life. He grabbed the main switch and slammed it up. Lights blinked back on across the prison, revealing the full horror below. Hundreds of inmates were fighting, guards were trapped, and fires were spreading toward the fuel storage area. If that went up, the entire island would explode. "Julia," Ramirez whispered into his radio, hoping she was still listening. She had stayed in contact after her news story went viral, warning him that powerful people were trying to erase the evidence. "I'm here," her voice answered, crackling through static. "I told the world what's happening. The mayor's office is sending rescue boats, but you need to get out before it's too late." Ramirez looked down at the chaos. "Not without proof," he said. "People have to see what Harris did." He grabbed the folder he'd hidden earlier and stuffed it into his jacket, then headed toward the courtyard. The heat was unbearable. The ground trembled as part of the roof collapsed behind him. When he finally reached Harris, the lieutenant was pouring gasoline along the walls. "It's over, Harris!" Ramirez shouted. Harris turned slowly. "You think shutting down Rikers will fix anything?" he yelled over the roar of the flames. "You think the city cares? They built this place to forget people like them." He pointed at the inmates surrounding them. "This is justice, Ramirez. I'm just speeding it up." "You're destroying lives," Ramirez shouted back. "You'll kill everyone here." Harris laughed. "That's the point." He struck a match. For a second, the world seemed to freeze, the tiny flame reflecting in his eyes. Ramirez lunged forward, knocking Harris to the ground as the match flew into the air. It landed on the spilled gasoline. Boom! A thunderous explosion shook the island. Fire erupted across the yard. The blast threw Ramirez backward, slamming him into a wall, his vision blurred, ears ringing. When he opened his eyes, Harris was gone, swallowed by the fire. The next morning, helicopters finally landed on what was left of Rikers Island. The jail was destroyed. Over half the buildings had collapsed. Survivors were taken to nearby hospitals. The news called it the darkest night in New York's prison history. Days later, the mayor announced it officially. Rikers Island would be permanently shut down. But for Officer Ramirez, the story wasn't over. Lying in his hospital bed, he turned on the TV. The reporter was Julia Carter, standing in front of the smoking ruins. Officials claim the explosion was caused by a riot, she said. But according to inside sources, there's more to this story than they're telling us. Then she looked directly at the camera. The truth behind the shutdown of Rikers Island may be far darker than anyone imagines. Ramirez gripped the folder on his lap, its edges burned and blackened, but the evidence inside still intact. And as he looked out the window at the city skyline, he whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. It's only the beginning."